departments of the New York Times are banned from curating lists of any kind. Grocery lists, to-do lists, bucket lists, Angie's list, the 30 greatest American living writers. That's just simply not the list. I'm looking at the list and I go, oh yeah, Babyface is on there. Okay, Paul Simon on there, Stevie Wonder on there, Smokey Robinson. And then you got some dude named Stephen Merritt. The problem is when you let critics in the room, okay, they try to out-artiste one another. They try to outrange one another. But the 30 greatest American writers, okay, that's simple. Who got the hits? That's how you get in the room. And then if you want to parse resumes after that, that's when you can go ahead and get into your artiste and your critic and all your degrees and your dictionaries you done read and all your little degrees. But your resume, the hits get you in the room. Because if we out here just having just Fiona Apples of the world and the Stephen Merritts of the world and even the Lucinda Williams of the world, we just bringing them in the room alongside a Babyface, alongside a Niles Rodgers. Niles Rodgers had to sell 750 million albums to get in the room. Or is it just me, or did all the black writers have to bring in a boatload of culturally changing, of not only chart-topping hits, but culturally changing success in order to get in the list? And then you got Fiona Apple up in here with 56 songs total and only one to chart. The black writers couldn't critically acclaim their way into the list. But Stephen Merritt, with not even one song that even made any chart, they didn't even eke in at 99. He gets to be in there next to Holland Doja Holly, who got 12 #1 hits and 35 top 10s. That shit look crazy having Stephen Merritt up there next to Nile Rodgers, who sold over 750 million albums. I want to make sure y'all understand that this is not necessarily all about race. Paul Simon should be on there. Taylor Swift should be on there. Carole King should be on there. Love all of those artists. I played 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover yesterday. But there isn't one black writer on that list that y'all critically acclaimed on there. Frank Ocean couldn't critically acclaim his way on that list. Black writers had to chart their way. They said that Fiona Apple took off 30 years and came back and hit a grand slam with Fetch the Bolt Cutters.
Fetch the Bolt Cutters.
That didn't grace no chart. But you get to be in there next to Missy Elliott.
And over 30 years.
Like literally
over 30
took
years.
X amount of years off, came back, hit a grand slam in the World Series.
What grand slam?
Yeah, and
Just
doesn't
like it was nothing.
And Fiona Apple is on the list. They called Fetch the Bolt Cutters a grand slam. You know what a grand slam is? Jermaine Dupri's 3 consecutive Hot 100 #1s. That's a grand slam. You know what's a grand slam? Dream writing Umbrella in 2008 and then coming back a decade and a half later and writing another #1 hit and Break My Soul and Cuff It. That's a grand slam. When you take off 15 years between 2 albums that don't chart, that's not a grand slam. Y'all want to critically acclaim, you know, some of my white writers. That wasn't the same standard for my black writers. Because if it's the same, why is Frank Ocean not in there? There ain't nobody more critically acclaimed than Frank Ocean. He can't even get a whiff. Or if you really want to go granola with it, get Tracy Chapman in there. Fiona Apple has released 56 songs with 55 misses. Her highest charting song is 21. And she's in there next to Stevie goddamn Wonder. Songs in the Key of Life. Then they had the nerve to say they had to draw the line somewhere. So they decided to draw it at Billy Joel. Billy Joel with over 160 million records sold.
I like Billy Joel. I know you don't like Billy Joel. I like Billy Joel. People I love like Billy Joel. And Billy Joel exists in pre-existing traditions. You got to draw the line somewhere.
They drew it at Billy Joel. They didn't draw it at Fetch the Bolt Cutters. They thought Fetch the Bolt Cutters, they had to get that on the list. And Stephen Merritt, let me tell y'all something. It baffles me that some of my white writers have the luxury of thumbing their nose at the industry, at the establishment. And they get looked at as purists. They get looked at as artistes. In an award speech, Fiona Apple can call this world bullshit and still get nominated for Grammys, even though every song she released is tanking, but they get looked at as artistes. There's some nobility in them thumbing their nose at the establishment because they don't want to compete and they don't want to be commercial. If you don't want to compete at the top levels, Stephen Merritt, Fiona Apple, and even Lucinda Williams, that's fine. But in that same space, you're not in the pros, okay? You're not competing with the baby faces. You're not competing with the Dreams of the world. You're just not. You're not competing with the Esther Deans of the world. Okay, that's pro level. That's put me in the room with any artist and I'm going to come out with a smash. That's the level. That's songwriting. What's interesting about these critics is that they seem to leave that out. They're trying to break things down to the granular essence. And they're asking all of these questions that don't belong. This one question: can you write a hit or fucking not? Because that is the goal shared by 99% of songwriters when they set out to write a song. They're trying to write a hit. That is what's going on in the room. And when y'all created the list, y'all tried to push that out of the room for some writers. But the reality is that's the first factor. You bring in your resume, you bring in your boatload of hits, but if you release 56 songs and ain't now one of them break the top 20, you ain't in the room. I'm sorry, you ain't in the room. Now, y'all can critically acclaim them inside the room, okay? But the reality is that list and those requirements weren't shared for everybody because every single one of those black writers on there has legendary culture-shifting, chart-topping smashes. You can't leave off of Pharrell Williams, who spent more weeks at #1 than Elvis goddamn Presley. Okay, you can't leave off of Berry Gordy. Y'all left off Berry Gordy, and I don't know if y'all know that he wrote songs or not, but Berry Gordy started his career as a songwriter, writing Lonely Teardrops, writing Money, That's What I Want by the Contours, and Shop Around. So when I think of Americana pop music and the 30 greatest American songwriters alive, when I think of who set the pop foundation for this country, there's two guys I think of, maybe three. It's Berry Gordy, Billy Joel, and Smokey Robinson. And only one out of the three made the list, okay? And the last point I want to make, if it's the 30 greatest American writers, okay, you got to stop all this genre. You got to stop. It's just the 30 greatest. You bring in your resume, bring in the hits, and let's see where it all lines up. You don't have to have, we got to have a bachata. We have to have somebody from bachata in here, okay? Yeah, no, you don't. You don't have to have a bachata artist in there. You don't have to have that. If they don't have no top 10 hits, if they ain't got no Hot 100 #1s, if they don't have Jermaine Dupri's resume, then they shouldn't be on the list, okay? Romeo Santos shouldn't be in there before Pharrell. Romeo Santos shouldn't be in there before Jermaine Dupri. He just shouldn't. So you're just forcing your way. You're trying to have some eclectic list. And if you want to have that eclectic list, just call it that. Call it the New York Times most eclectic, critically acclaimed, diverse artists representing the most genres of music writers list. Call it that shit, okay? But don't call it the 30 greatest American writers because you don't because you know what's not on the list is the 30 greatest American writers, okay? I'm gonna make a couple changes for you. We taking Fiona ass off. We taking Stevie Merritt no hits having ass off. We're gonna put on Jermaine Dupri. We're putting on Pharrell Williams. We're gonna put on Billy Joel. Yeah, there you go.